This is Real Life with Deb Waterbury, a real show for real people with real issues. And now, here's your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Welcome to our Valentine's special of Real Life with Deb Waterbury. And because we're doing a Valentine's special, I got both my girls with me.
Aww.
Dwight and Karen Wendling. And so y'all are used to seeing both of these guys whenever we do all. Yes,
not together.
Just not together.
Normally, because it gets a little crazy.
It does.
When we're all together.
This is our we're going to go ahead and do our, what do you call that? Whenever you're trying to say this, I'm sorry about this before it happens right away.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We're just
disclaimer. Yeah, this is our disclaimer.
Yeah.
Yes, that this is going to get a little crazy, but that's okay. We all been doing ministry together for a long time, so we know each other. Really
We're going to
well.
get a little reel up in here because
Yes.
this is Real Life with Deb Waterbury.
That's right. And so since, it's weird that we're talking about Valentine's Day and, it's the love holiday and whatever, but we thought it was really important that we talk about loneliness and dealing with loneliness because actually, besides New Year's, this is one of the worst time of year for a lot of people in dealing with loneliness. And that's understandable. We put so much emphasis on relationship between a man and a woman and that our value being in that we thought it was really important for us as believers to know how to deal with loneliness from a godly perspective.
Even in relationships.
Yes.
I think we put a lot of value, as we should, on relationships with other people.
Right.
So at New Year's, I should be around people that love me and I love. And on Valentine's Day, I should be around people that love me and that I love.
Absolutely. Right. And the stigma, I think, because it's Valentine's Day, that stigma is that you've got to be with a special person. And if you don't have a special person, you have failed.
Right.
And then you go back feeling lonely. And it doesn't even matter. That will go for people who might be in a marriage that's having an issue. Or even if you're not having necessarily an issue, but you don't feel like your spouse is romantic or thinks about you in that way, or he gives you the same old thing every year for Christmas. I mean, for Valentine's Day.
Right, or being in a room full of people and still feeling alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So it doesn't mean that you physically don't have to be alone to be lonely.
That's good.
And so what I want to deal with here, what we want to deal with is what does it look like to deal with loneliness from a godly perspective. Yes. And I think at the very onset, it is a whole lot about our attitudes, our perspectives have to be appropriate, have to be the right kinds of perspectives, or we're going to be lonely, and we're going to deal with that, unfortunately, in the wrong way. And I know so many, when I very first started Love Everlasting Ministries, the motto was breaking the barriers of isolation. Because, and this is, across the world, this is what I found with women and men, but I mean, obviously I deal mostly with women, that the issue for them was loneliness. And then what you do in response to that often is isolate yourself.
Oh, make it worse.
Making it worse.
Which is where the devil wants you.
Yes, and he wants you alone. He wants you to be alone. It's like, that, and I've used this analogy so often on the air, when it's like a lion who goes after a pack of animals. He's not going to go after the strongest one or the ones who are surrounded by a bunch of people or a bunch of other animals. He's going to go for the one that's wounded, that separates itself,
that's on the edge,
somewhere,
that's weaker.
Yes, has been isolated in some way. That's the one he's going to pounce on. So he needs you to be isolated. He needs you to be licking your wounds, be they spiritual or whatever, and then by yourself. And we tend to do that by ourselves. If you're feeling wounded, you will then separate yourself from the people that you should necessarily actually be with because you're trying to lick your wounds, and you are perfect prey for the predator at that moment. So dealing with loneliness in an appropriate way, because you're going to feel lonely. There are going to be moments in your life where you feel lonely. What do you do with that? What is the appropriate way that we handle that as believers? So as we get started, I wanted to share just two scriptures as we move into this, and we're still in our relationship series, but we're just taking a little break to talk about dealing with loneliness on this special episode. So Isaiah 41, verse 10, and most of you will be familiar with at least part of this. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That's a beautiful promise from our Father.
Very reassuring.
Yes, and it's where, when we find ourselves in a place where we're not surrounded by people that we think will affirm us or make us feel loved, where do we actually get that? And God often in his word will tell us to focus on him. I'm your God. And the next scripture in Joshua chapter 1, 5 through 6, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage.
Wow, that's like my favorite verse.
Yes,
One
I know,
of them. Not that there
yes.
isn't like a billion, but
I know.
yeah.
And what is it about that verse that makes it your favorite, Karen?
Is that I know that I can be strong and courageous because he's with me. So no matter what challenges I face, I know that he's going to lead me, he's going to take care of me, he's going to be with me. You know?
And you can't know that if you don't know that.
Right.
I mean, there's so many times that we wait until we're in the middle of crisis and being in the middle of a crisis of loneliness to try to figure out these truths. And you can't try to figure out or own that God says, I'm not going to leave you, I love you, I'm not going to forsake you, I will give you strength, I will deliver you. You cannot go to that verse or those scriptures in the midst of the crisis of loneliness and expect that to comfort you the way it would if you knew it beforehand.
Right. Both go together, though.
Yes, absolutely. And you should go to them, whether you're going to go to, if you haven't ever been there, obviously go there.
Go there.
But it is so much better to go there before, so that is part of what you own in your heart.
A foundation.
Yes.
Even the word courage. Courage doesn't mean that you're not going to do anything.
Right.
Courage means I'm afraid. I know God is with me.
Right.
And I'm going to do it with him. So
Right.
it doesn't mean being isolated. Oh, I'm afraid. I'm just not going to do anything. No, it means I'm still afraid. But because of God, I have the courage to at least do it anyhow.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
that's good.
So, Dee, what do you think causes people to get lonely? What causes loneliness?
I'm laughing right now because we had talked at one point. Sometimes we're lonely because it's our fault.
Yes.
Sometimes, and I think back to myself, I can just think back to day-to-day things. Sometimes I push people away. Sometimes because I've been hurt in the past, I don't let people get close. And then the devil loves it.
Yes.
He starts that cycle of, now I don't want people near me. Now I don't want to get hurt. Nobody's getting near me. So why am I so lonely? And so you almost kind of, because you don't trust God enough to open your heart,
Right.
that you're kind of stuck being alone. And alone and lonely, I believe, are different.
Yes.
Most of us are like begging for, can I please get 5 minutes alone?
Exactly.
Way different than, God, I'm so lonely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so being lonely, for me, was what brought me to the cross. And so being alone is different. But if I find myself feeling lonely, it's probably because I've pushed people away or I won't let them in.
Karen, do you think there's any other reason why we get to loneliness?
I was thinking about like a wife, a mom who totally focuses on her children and negates her friendships.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
or you can be a single person who focuses on your job, your work, or whatever, and you let friendships fall to the wayside. Because quite honestly, friendships take work, right?
Yes,
like,
they do. Yes.
We've had to work on this over time. Like we always touch base. There could be months that we go by without really talking to each other,
Right.
which is rare. But like maybe a month. But like we always touch base, so it takes
Right.
work. So if you're not willing to work at those relationships, even with a spouse, even with a friend, whatever, then you will have loneliness.
Absolutely.
There is no one there to go to when you need someone.
Right.
Because you yourself have to be a friend if you want a friend.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. And then I also believe, and I think that obviously it is always something that we probably perpetuate ourselves. I think people are often lonely because they've been hurt.
Oh yeah.
Because somebody has betrayed them, someone has either betrayed a confidence, they haven't lived up. We've all talked about expectations and unmet expectations in relationships. And often people will perpetuate that loneliness, at least I know I did, because eventually you just get so hurt that you build that monster wall in front of you that you're hiding behind. You think you're protecting yourself, but what you find is eventually in that wall that you build, you're the only one behind it. and you've cut everybody else out, and what you find is that, okay, now I'm back here by myself, and nobody can scale that wall because I've worked so hard to build it. I talk about this also in The Lies That Bind. It's lie number 3 about being strong, where you're just, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take this, I can do it, I'll be strong. In the meantime, you're putting brick upon brick upon brick in front of you of these barriers between you and anybody who might hurt you.
So good.
And like I said, what you do is you end up one day and you're by yourself behind that wall. That's just universal. So I think all those things cause loneliness. And then I believe the other universal part of that is that we do perpetuate it, because there is, I built the wall. I chose to be behind it. I chose to isolate myself. I chose to stop my relationships with my friends in favor of my children. Or even, a lot of times it's being lonely in a marriage, but you've chosen children over your husband.
Right.
Wow.
And that happens very often. I mean, I remember having my very first baby. I mean, Spence is 32 now, 33. I remember when I had him and the difficulty I had transitioning from being a mother to still being a wife. So, I thank God that I actually had a friend back then. She was very, very prim and proper, which kind of cracked me up that she gives me the advice that she gives me. Her name was Lori. And, Spence was about 3 months old. And after Spence being at 3 months, I began to realize there was this chasm that was building between Jeff and I, where we weren't communicating. We weren't doing anything, to be quite frank.
Communication was the least of your problems.
Exactly. Yeah. Disclaimer. Yeah. But in the midst of that, I went to Lori and I was explaining the problem, and she looked at me and told me that I needed to go buy new underwear. And I remember thinking, why in the world would I need to buy new underwear? But what she explained to me was that in the midst of being a mom, I had forgotten that I was a woman.
That's good.
And when you because being a mom is all encompassing,
right?
And so you just forget everything else. And she said, you need to remember that you were a woman before you were a mom. So she said, buy some frilly underwear so you can remember that underneath your mom clothes, you're still a beautiful woman that is attractive to your husband. And so once you're a woman, then you remember that you're a wife first.
So
and the truth is that's loneliness is going to come for a varying number of reasons, but one of them is because we just get so wrapped up in being a mom and that we forget everything else. So all these different reasons for being lonely, or there are lots, we can find a billion for loneliness or why we feel lonely. But Dee, why do you think it is that Satan loves us to be in that place?
I feel like what you guys talked about. For one, he likes us separated. He likes us because he's walking around like a roaring lion, seeking who he can devour. But I always think, I don't know what loneliness really feels like. I mean, maybe right at the end of my before Jesus life, but imagine what Jesus felt on the cross that day.
That's good.
No kidding.
I mean, that's true loneliness, when his Father, and he did that for me. So a lot of times it's like, that's probably why I'm lonely. I've walked, here's the God circle, and I've walked outside to do my own thing or to go to do whatever. As soon as I come back, he's there waiting for me.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what loneliness is really like. I know what it's like to be without God, because I've probably chosen to be without God.
Right.
Or I've made a decision, or I'm not taking time to be with him. I could not imagine what Jesus did for me.
Absolutely.
And so when I go back to read that, boy, I'm reminded, and I'm not so lonely anymore.
And that's a great segue into what do we do? How do we deal with it then? So Karen, basically, there are, so like I said, so many practical ways that we can get out of loneliness. But what is the one thing, reasons why we're in loneliness, but what is the one thing you think we ought to do as believers when we're dealing with loneliness?
Well, one thing is kind of hard, but obviously one thing is to be in the Word so that when you're struggling with stuff, you know what your identity is in Christ. You know that you're enough, and what God says about you is enough.
Yes.
But we have to be intentional in our friendships. We are the ones that have to go out and help our friends and be there when they need us. I'm constantly texting people going, hey, how's it going today? What's going on in your life? Or, hey, I heard that this is happening. Are you okay? Do you need anything? It takes work. You have to be intentional with friendships. You have to be intentional with your husband. You have to be intentional with your coworkers. You have to be intentional with your relationship with God.
It is all about relationship. And like you said, that's work. So if you are in a season of loneliness, you're right. I say moving into the Bible is your number one thing, because God will not leave you. He will not forsake you. But you are in charge of your loneliness. You are in charge of whether or not you feel it, because these are relationships that you have to build and be intentional about, just like you said.
Love is worth the risk.
Absolutely.
You're going to get hurt.
Yes.
But it's worth the risk to take the risk to love again.
Absolutely, yes. But we often don't want to do that because we want to protect our hearts. So I'd say number one piece of advice here for anyone watching who's dealing with loneliness: take a chance and move yourself out of it.
Yes.
Call somebody.
Be
Go
intentional.
serve at church. I mean,
Good.
goodness gracious, being in a service, being a servant disciple will bring you out of loneliness so darn fast.
Right.
It isn't about you. Life is not about you. Life is about how you exemplify Christ to this world. So if we take ourselves out of the equation, often we'll take loneliness out of the equation as well.
good.
You know, we really hope that all of you, if you have any comments, you have any questions, make sure you just comment below. Share this with others. I know it's Valentine's, but this is good stuff for whenever we're talking about our relationships, and those are a big deal. We love you guys. We say happy Valentine's Day and happy year and happy everything because we want you to be happy. Yes, yes. God bless you. We'll see you later. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Real Life with Deb Waterbury. I hope it's been a blessing to you as much as it was to me. You know, if you want any of my books or information on articles or any of my speaking engagements, you can go to my website at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.